Sure.
And thank you for coming. Father Jerry Riney is our last speaker of this season, certainly not the least speaker of the season, but will be our last time to have a talk on mercy. Father Jerry Riney grew up here at the Mount. His first job was emptying trash when he was in the 5th grade under the supervision of Mary Joseph. He was ordained in 1975, and 1975 was a regularly scheduled Holy Year. And he has been missioned at St. Mary the Woods in Whitesville, at Owensboro Catholic High School, and the first time he was pastored was at St. Jerome in Fancy Farm, and then St. Thomas More in Paducah, and then in Bowling Green at Holy Spirit, and most recently he came to St. Stephen Cathedral in Owensboro. He probably could be called a builder because I know he built St. Thomas More and also Holy Spirit. So Father Jerry enjoys people as well as John Grisham novels, skiing, and ice cream. Father Jerry.
My first job here was emptying trash. I was in the 4th or 5th grade, and it was over, well, it was everywhere, but I remember going home one day and asking Mom and Dad, we were at the dinner table, and I said, why did the sisters wrap their beer cans in newspaper? I said, well, we don't do that. Why do they do that? So they looked at each other and exchanged a glance of knowing and amusement, yes. So it is good to be here. I owe a lot to the Ursuline Sisters of Mount St. Joseph. I think in a very mysterious way, I'm sure that the Ursulines have had a lot to do with my call to priesthood, and the Ursulines certainly were part of my formation. Sister Robert Angela, Sister Cleophas, Sister Marie Montgomery was my 5th grade teacher, and then Sister Charles Ann was my 6th grade, and then 7th, 8th grade teacher was Sister Mary Agnes Vonderhart. So I had some great teachers, and so anything I know, I owe to them. So you can, depending on how this goes today, you can blame them. See how I applaud you for taking this month to just reflect upon the year of mercy, the Jubilee year of mercy. I understand Father Pat Reynolds was here first, and he talked about the door of mercy, a sign of the open door, the sign of mercy, and then Bishop William Francis Medley talked about chaos and harmony. He talked also about the adulterous woman. He talked about the 2 sons, the indulgent father and the spoiled boy. Hopefully there's a lot of the indulgent father in all of us and not so much of the spoiled child in each of us. And then Bishop Chuck Thompson was here. He talked a lot about the apostolic exhortation that Pope Francis just came out on the family and the joy of mercy. So I'm the kind of the cleanup guy. Actually, there is somebody said you save the best till last, but I said, there's a job in Rome called the street cleaner, and so they go around and they clean up, especially after the horses. So anyway, I'm probably a pretty good street cleaner. I'd like to take just a little bit different approach, if I may, and talk about, I'd like to talk about the Francis effect, because I think it is Francis that has got us where we are. We arrived at where we are in this year of mercy because of Francis. And I think it's pretty amazing, actually, what he has done and the effect that he has had. So I'd like to just talk a little bit about the Francis effect. As you know, he was the first leader in the Universal Church from the Southern Hemisphere. And actually, that means a lot. It's a different way of thinking, raised differently, a different mentality of people. And so I think it has a lot to do. He was the first Jesuit pope. Society of Jesus, founded in Rome, 1539, by Ignatius, Loyola, and the Nine Companions. And the effect that the Jesuits have had on the church throughout the world in that time. And I'm not sure how many universities are here in the United States, but quite a few. Villanova being one of them, that just won the NCAA tournament. So he is also strongly influenced by his work in the slums of Buenos Aires. And I'm not sure if it was his first assignment or not, but his parish was the slum of Buenos Aires. I mean, he was the pastor, he was the shepherd of people who had no home. I mean, they were homeless. And so that continues to influence who he is, and who he is as our Pope, as the servant of the servants of God. So Jorge Bergoglio was chosen as the 265th Pope. What a surprise that was. And it's turned out, I think, to be a pleasant surprise. For me, a wonderful surprise. So, and then he was strongly influenced by the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. So if we could just have the next slide. Oh, good. You already got it. Good. Strongly influenced by the exercises of St. Ignatius. And how many of you have actually used those exercises? Probably many of you have. And I have as well. So it's an 8-day or a 30-day retreat. Emphasis on prayer, discernment, and conversion. Now, this, I think, has a lot to do with how he leads us today, in my opinion, as I look back, because this 30-day retreat, or the 8-day retreat, but the whole Ignatian model is about dealing with darkness and light in your life, and being able to name the light in your life, but also being able to name the darkness in your life, and where God's grace really needs to shine. And then dealing with the demons in one's life. And only when we can deal with those demons in our lives can we really, I think, move forward, let go and move on. Certainly, and part of the exercises, and I think this is important, that we look at the motivation for what we do or do not do. Because it's the motivation. It's not really the externals. I mean, you have to look at that. But really, you have to get to the root cause. And why do we do what we do? And of course, the ideal for what we do should always be motivated by love. Now, because you and I are human beings, we don't always hit that ideal. And certainly, I think Pope Francis is aware of that. But it's always about leading one closer to God, and it becomes a way of living. Even the particular exam you're asked to do every night, to go back and to look at the day, to be grateful, first of all, to be grateful. Secondly, to acknowledge our need for help. Then to review the day honestly. And then to trust in God's forgiveness, wherever it might be needed for that day. And then commit ourselves to live differently tomorrow, or to live more fully tomorrow. So, the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, I think, certainly have not only influenced Pope Francis, and not only Jesuits, but lots and lots of other lay people around the world. And then, of course, the choice of his name, Francis, is significant. And at first, I just assumed it was going to be, it was because of Francis Xavier, who was a Jesuit. But, it was Francis of Assisi. And for a Jesuit to choose a Franciscan, it was shocking. It was really shocking at the time. And of course, all these jokes about Jesuits and Franciscans and Dominicans. And I remember hearing one time about a Jesuit and a Dominican and a Franciscan were going for a walk, and they were debating about which of their orders was the greatest. And so all of a sudden there was an apparition of the Holy Family that appeared in front of them, of Jesus in the manger and Mary and Joseph there. And the Franciscan immediately fell on his face. He was overcome with the humility in which Jesus was born, the humble circumstances. And then the Dominican fell on his knees and started adoring and reflecting upon the Trinity and the mystery of the Trinity and the mystery of the Holy Family. And then the Jesuit walked over to Joseph and put his arms around Joseph and said, "Where are you going to send him to school?" So, Jesuits are certainly noted for their education. But Francis is also noted for his humility. When he appeared on the balcony there in St. Peter's Square, when the white smoke was coming out and all of that, he was dressed in just a plain, austere white cassock. And the first thing he did, he asked the people in the Basilica, in the St. Peter's Square, the thousands and thousands of people, to pray for him. Now that was something different for our Pope to do. And I was kind of blown away. I thought, wow, this is going to be different. We're going to have some changes, I think. It just was a new day, so to speak. So after that, and kind of following up on that, Francis chooses to live simply. He chose not to live in the papal apartments, but in the Domus Martis, the House of Mary, Martha. And it's a hotel-like facility of about 150 rooms, but he chooses to eat in the cafeteria there. He wants to be around people. He doesn't want to be isolated. He wants that interaction. And the title he prefers is the Servant of the Servants of God. A title that I believe came about, I stand corrected on this because it's a guess, I think it was when John the 23rd was Pope back right before Vatican II. So Francis is a humble man, takes a bus, prefers visiting the poor over embracing the trappings of his position. Francis is a nightmare for security, drives the Swiss guards crazy and his security people crazy, but he walks the talk. And he is somebody that doesn't just talk about humility, but he really does live it. I have noticed how he uses symbolic action so well, and a lot of the prophets did that, as you recall in the scriptures, but he uses symbolic action very well. And you notice that on his first Holy Thursday, he chose to wash the feet. He went to a juvenile facility and chose to wash the feet of a Muslim, a Hindu, a Christian, girls and boys. A lot of eyebrows were opened at that. But many people had been doing that kind of thing for a long time. But to have the leader of our church do it was quite a powerful symbol. And then the second year, he went to a home for the elderly and washed their feet. And again, Christians, Catholics, non-Christians, and men and women. And then this past year, he was really making a very public statement to our world as he washed the feet of immigrants. And again, quite a variety. And actually, just 2 weeks ago, if you saw in the news, actually it was April 16th, I believe, that he visited the Greek island of Lesbos. And he went there to visit with the immigrants who were there, and lots and lots and lots of them are on this island and really nowhere to go. So it was really a statement to Europe and to other countries, open your doors, open your hearts. And then he took 3 families, if it was 12 people, I believe, back on the plane with him to Rome. I'm sure that was a big surprise to everybody there. What are we going to do with these people? But, he's like that. He's unpredictable, but in many ways, he's very predictable in his humility and his constantly reaching out to the poor and those on the fringe of society. So, then next, he really challenges the daylights out of everybody. He challenges the daylights out of cardinals, archbishops, bishops, priests, deacons, I'd say the Catholic laity as well, and sisters, but Christians everywhere. More than once he's told priests, he said, get out of your office, get out into the marketplace, get into the streets and homes. Get out where people are, where lives are lived. Don't live your life insularly. And it's easy to live our life in a bubble. He constantly highlights a humble church. He says that shepherds ought to be so close and know the needs of the people in such a way that they smell like the sheep. I have to tell you, when we were celebrating our 40th anniversary of priesthood, we always do that at our convocation. We honor each of the jubilarians. But the bishop had asked me to go to a conference in Minneapolis during January. Can you believe it? Must be hotels are a little cheaper then. But so I ended up having to go. It was the same week, so I ended up being in Minneapolis. But they asked my assistant, Father Matthew Sudesh Kulathanapadico, if you remember him. He's an Indian priest, a wonderful, wonderful young man. He gave a toast, and he started out by saying, Father Jerry stinks. And so I heard lots about that, for sure. But he has certainly addressed the temptation of clericalism, its attraction to privilege, prestige, and honor. He's always talking about that. And he has, John Allen Jr., not long ago, wrote an article about it's hard to pin him down. People on the left and people on the right, he doesn't please either side all the time, that he's a little unpredictable, and he called him the both-and Pope in an either-or world. So I think Pope Francis realizes that, the world isn't black or white. Now, I used to think it was when I was first ordained. After I was ordained about a year, I realized there was a lot of gray, and things were not so black and white. And actually, it was Pope Benedict that talked about either or both and, that with the Catholic Church, you have Scripture and, both Scripture and tradition. That we believe you're saved by grace and by works, which comes first, the chicken or the egg. And it's doctrine and pastoral praxis. So with Pope Francis, he certainly realizes that it's not black or white oftentimes, but gray. And I think he certainly gets that. He's very aware that the church must be both a church that teaches and a church that discerns. And a church that discerns, listens, and learns. I think Francis envisions the church as a community that listens to God speaking both inside and outside the Catholic Church. He believes we should be attuned to world events, science, art, music, culture, and have the full voice of human experience, informed and graced by the Incarnation. So he's saying God speaks to us through prayer. God speaks to us through Scripture. God speaks to us through the teaching church. But God also speaks to us through our human experience. And, I think we all know that a lot is learned by listening to people and listening to people's stories. And to be honest, it seems to me that for probably the last couple hundred years, there's been an emphasis on the church that teaches. But I believe with Francis, he is much more, the emphasis is much more a church that listens and learns. And that drives some people crazy. Now, it's not that he has changed any doctrine, but how he handles things, how he recently with the Synod on the family, he wanted input from families. Imagine that. You wanted inputs from mothers and fathers and families. And so he's always one who wants to listen and learn, and that's part of the discernment, and I think that's part of the spiritual exercises, that's just part of how he breathes. So dialogue is important for Francis. I know some of the cardinals were saying he put some things on the table, how to minister to divorced and remarried people, and what about gay people in the church? And he put some of these things on the table, and some of the cardinals said, we shouldn't even be talking about these things. And he's saying, well, sure you should. This is where people's lives are lived. We are to minister to everyone, not just people in the ideal circumstances of life, but people who haven't always met that ideal. So I think we shouldn't really be surprised that Pope Francis would call a Jubilee year, a year of mercy, and that exhortation is called the face of mercy. And of course, Jesus Christ is the face of mercy. It would be interesting for all of us, that would be a great reflection for all of us, do people see me as the face of mercy? As the face of forgiveness. I know Mother Teresa and her missionaries of charity, of course, all over the world, but the story is told about how she picked up people off the streets of Calcutta, people that were dying, and they were in the gutter, and they were just filthy and stinking, and she would take them home and she would bathe them and wash them and prepare them for a dignified death. And the story is told about her doing this with a man, and she had cleaned him up, and she was putting lotion on his wounds, and he opened his eyes and said, "Are you God?" So every one of us is called to be the face of God. We're called to be the face of mercy, and that's exactly what Jesus was. He was that face of mercy. So I'm going to have a little break here. I was ordained during Holy Year, 1975. Not a special Holy Year, it was just a normal Holy Year. But because it was a Holy Year, Pope Paul VI decided to ordain a bunch of priests, or a bunch of deacons, to be priests in St. Peter's Square. And actually that year, on June 29th, he ordained about half of my classmates. There were about 22 of my classmates that were ordained in St. Peter's Square, but there were 267 deacons that were ordained from countries all over the world. It was a long, long service, like 5 hours, and it was hot. I have to tell you a little story. Bishop Seneca heard that Pope Paul VI was going to ordain, and he said, you will be ordained there. And I said, Bishop, I will if you can send all my family over. And he said, well, you wouldn't refuse to be ordained in Rome by the Pope. And I said, well, I want my family and those who have supported me all these years to be there. And, would you... Anyway, we had these letters back and forth about 3 or 4 or 5 times, and I was beginning to think, I don't know if I'm going to be ordained or not, because I didn't want to be ordained there without my family being there and without people that have loved and supported me all these years. And I knew some of them would be there, but not everybody. So finally, I thought, we went back and forth, and finally, I thought, this isn't working. So I wrote another letter and said, Bishop, there hasn't been a priest from St. Alphonsus since Father Murphy was there, and that was over 50 years ago. Don't you think it would be good for me to be ordained in Owensboro and, have my first Mass at St. Alphonsus? And he wrote back and said, a great idea. You'll be ordained on August 9th, and I was very happy to finally get over that hump. So, but what I wanted to say was, because I was ordained in a Holy Year, my parents gave me this chalice. I would just like to pass this around. whether this is a true story or not, it's a good legend. But there was a parish right down the hill from where we went to school, from the North American College, called San Onofrios. And it was one of the spots, it was one of the churches of the early pilgrimages. You know, they had churches in Rome that people could pilgrimage to. Well, in the cortile, in the courtyard of St. Onofrios, there was some graffiti written on a column there, and the graffiti said, "Prego, piango, spero." I pray, I cry, I hope. And so I had that put on my chalice just because the story goes that that was written there by a pilgrim visiting Rome on a holy year, way back in the 14th century. So to me, it was just a good carryover. So, and I've had some homilies on that. But if you want to pass this around, you're welcome to do that. There for a lot of years, I used to save this chalice, and I thought, what am I saving this for? So finally, I thought, I need to be using it. I need to use it. It's kind of like china. What do you save your good china for? You need to use it once in a while. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about the Francis effect?
Well, you covered it real well.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next slide, which is actually going to be on the spiritual and corporal works of mercy. And, actually, this is Jesus' social plan. It's his plan for social change. And some of you have taught this to your students through the years. Isn't it amazing how relevant these still are?
Yeah.
And how much emphasis. Of course, this is really Matthew 25. Lord, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you thirsty? When did we see you away from home? When did we visit you when you were sick or in prison? When did, And Jesus says, well, as long as you did it for one of these little ones, you did it for me. So Jesus identifying himself with the poor, with the needy, with those on the fringe of society. So if you have this, you can just pass it by. But I brought some of these bookmarks that have the spiritual and corporal works of mercy. Then the spiritual works of mercy. The next slide. Yeah. These probably would be a little more challenging for some of us. But in his exhortation, Pope Francis asked us to reflect upon the spiritual and corporal works of mercy during this year of mercy. And then he says, don't just reflect upon them, he says put them into practice. And it certainly can reawaken our conscience that can often be dulled. So, one of the definitions that I like for a prophet comes from here. A prophet is somebody who comforts the afflicted and afflicts the comfortable. And, I think I can think back to people in my life who have challenged me at times to, who have comforted but also have afflicted me to do more. And it's not something you welcome, and yet it's something that I think is important. And yeah. Let's look at the next slide. This is should be a slide of. Okay.
You're gonna have to tell me where to go.
Well, there should be a picture here of the two doors. Go back to 4. No, the other
Yeah,
one.
go the other way.
Yeah. Okay, this is Bishop Medley, who opened our door at St. Stephen's Cathedral. And then right before that one,
Kicked out, then you lost your mind.
go back to the next one.
Lost your, thank you.
Have I? Is it the battery?
I don't know.
Super Dan.
No. Rather of battery. Must be time to stop. And the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. If you go back one, there's also one of the popes, the next one. Oh, guess what?
Am I going the wrong way?
No, one more. Yes.
That one?
Now that's the Holy Year door at St. Peter's Basilica, and actually, I was fortunate to be over in Rome in September. Actually, I was there when my dad died. We had no idea that he was anywhere near death, certainly when I left. But when I saw this holy door at St. Peter's, I immediately thought of the Holy Year door at St. Stephen and just the connection between those doors. For the first time, Pope Francis expanded the holy doors. Usually the holy doors were those right in Rome, as well as the basilicas in Rome. But he expanded it to, let's see, almost 300 archdioceses and almost 2,000 dioceses throughout the world. So every diocese has a Holy Year door that people can pilgrimage and so that they can pilgrimage to that. And the only way any of this makes sense is the door represents Jesus. And I know, I think Father Pat talked about that a bit, but the door represents Jesus Christ. And so when we go through the door, the implication is that we have a conversion experience. You know, that it's not just a matter of walking through the door and saying a prayer, it's a matter of really allowing the Lord to change us. The one who comes in and out through me will find green pasture. Even though you walk in the valley of darkness, you'll fear no evil, because I will be there with my rod and the staff to give you comfort, and so on. So the whole purpose of this is the theme, the motto of this holy year, the Jubilee Year of Mercy, is merciful like the Father. So if you could go to that slide, which I've got some others here. There's no way I could cover all this material, so I've just slimmed it down a bit. One more. That's it. God is merciful. It's kind of like saying God is love. If a person truly loves, then mercy and forgiveness is going to be part of that. So God cannot be other than merciful. So what we are called to do is to receive mercy and then give mercy. And I think we have to experience mercy before we can be generous with mercy. I find a lot of people in pastoral ministry that aren't there yet, and they need to be forgiven, and they need to be healed, and it's so important. You know, I always say, everybody knows how bad they are, but not everybody knows how good they are. So I think it's our job to let people know how good they are. So to be able to receive mercy. Are you a better receiver or a giver? I bet most people in this room are probably better givers. But you know, I was just talking to a lady recently. I went to visit her, and the aging process is beginning to take its toll on her, and she's been a very independent, educated, giving woman. And now she has to be dependent. And so I was just saying to her, now is your time to receive. And she said, I don't like it. I said, well, it doesn't matter if you like it or not. It doesn't matter if you like it or not. You have to learn part of love is giving and receiving. And so God is going to be doing something. I told her, God is doing something in your life right now. So don't block that grace. Learn how to receive graciously, and be grateful. So, and then Luke 15, as you know, that's the story of the lost thing, the lost animal, and the lost person. And you can always go to the Gospel of Luke. It's the Gospel of forgiveness. It's the Gospel of mercy. There's one story after another in the Gospel of Luke about God's extravagant, unconditional, amazing mercy. And then, don't you love that story, though, of the prodigal son? And I think Bishop Medley talked a little bit about it. Imagine asking somebody, a kid, a spoiled kid at that, asking the father for his inheritance. It was like, it's like a slap in the face. It's almost like saying, I wish you were dead. But the Father, who gives us free will, gave him the inheritance, gave him his inheritance. He goes off and he squanders it, and then he comes back. My father's slaves have it better than I do. So what always amazes me, while he was still a speck on the horizon, the Father started running toward him. So the Father was watchful, was vigilant all along, waiting for him to come back, waiting for him to come to his senses. And of course he did, and he had his little speech prepared and all of that. Also, it was unheard of for a Jewish father to run toward a child. It was always the child that was to come to the parent. So it was unheard of. It was scandalous, and Jesus knew that. It was scandalous for the parent to be running toward the child. And so when he reached the child, he started his little speech, and he just said, hey, he embraced him and said, get a ring for his finger, sandals for his feet, kill the fatted calf. We have to celebrate the son of mine was lost and is now found. He was dead and has come back to life. And so the party began, and then we know the story about the older son, who always did the right thing, but maybe not for the right reason. The older son who ended up being a little jealous of his younger brother. Can God be too merciful? Can God be too forgiving? Do we get upset sometimes if people don't get what they deserve? We better be glad that we don't get what we deserve, because all of us are saved by that grace of God. I guess the question, open-ended, is, did the older son ever go into the party or not? And that's the question all of us have to ask ourselves. Peter asked Jesus, how many times do I have to forgive? 7 times 7, and he thought he was being very generous. And Jesus then challenged him again and said, no, not 7 times 7, but 70 times 7 times. So how we're called to forgive as the Father has forgiven us. Notice how Jesus always hung around with people on the fringe, whether it was the woman at the well, who came to the well at the hottest part of the day so she could avoid all the other women, because the going to the well was kind of a social time for women in those days. And so she thought if she'd go the hottest part of the day, she would miss them. And but Jesus met her there, and once she encountered him, it changed her life. And she became a great evangelizer. Forgot why she even came to the well, left her water jug there, ran back to tell him what had happened. So it's amazing what Jesus does by accepting people as they are. I always tell people that work in ministry, together with myself, ministry is not where I want people to be, but it's accepting people where they are, and then kind of continuing to love them and bring them along. So I think that's the case with all of us. Is there any absolute in life? What is love of God? Is love the only absolute? Jesus certainly talks a lot about it. He certainly embraces people with his forgiveness and love. I see that in the sacrament of reconciliation a lot. People coming back, and that they're needing to experience forgiveness. I remember one time I was at Catholic High, this lady called and said, I need to make an appointment with you. I need to go to confession. I said, fine, we made an appointment. And she said, well, there's only one issue, and that's, what's that? And she said, I'm not Catholic. I said, well, come on in. And we'll talk about it. So she came in and, you know, she had sinned, she knew it, she needed to talk about it, she needed to experience forgiveness, and I think she left that day feeling a lot lighter, feeling unburdened. So I've been amazed at how the sacrament of reconciliation has changed people's lives and has helped people to experience forgiveness. So, yes, can you go straight to God? Yes, all of that. People are constantly asking that. But our job as a confessor is to help people to experience that forgiveness. So, we're not there as judge, as you know, but we're there with really two hats. We're there representing the community, but we're also there representing Jesus Christ, the divine forgiver. I think there's some misconceptions about forgiveness. I think a lot of times we think forgiveness is easy, and it's not. I think forgiveness is hard. I think sometimes forgiveness might look easy when we're looking at it into other people. When it comes to ourselves, we see how difficult it can be. It's normal, I think, sometimes to seek vengeance and retribution and violence. That's kind of instinctive to us. So without Christ, I think that's our reaction. But we are called, you know, to forgive. And sometimes I think that forgiveness takes time. Secondly, forgiveness can't be rushed. It does take time, especially if people have been deeply hurt. You know, remember when the Amish situation happened 10, 15 years ago, and almost immediately people were on the national TV saying, "We forgive," Robinson was his name, I think. And I was like, wow, let's wait a little bit, let work through that a little bit. How could you, I mean, and he said, we have no choice. That's what we're called to do. That's what we're called to live. And that was true. But I think it takes time to forgive and for real reconciliation to come about. I hear people say that if I've forgiven, why can't I forget? So forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Forgiveness means remembering. It's, you know, forgive and remember what God has done for you. Forgive and remember what God has done for me, and then I need to be as generous back. I think some people see forgiveness as a weakness, maybe especially men. But, you know, it takes a lot of strength to forgive and to be forgiven. And then I think sometimes people think a misconception is the only one who benefits from forgiveness is the one forgiven. But the forgiver gets a lot of it too. There's that old Chinese proverb said, you know, if you do not forgive, you're digging a grave not only for your enemy, but also for yourself. So unforgiveness is like digging two graves, one for your enemy, one for yourself. So there's several times that I've been able to see the power of forgiveness. I don't know if any of you knew Father Charles Strobel, who was a priest in the Diocese of Nashville, but his mother, Mary Catherine, was an amazing lady. Her husband died when she was very young, leaving her with 4 kids, and the oldest was 10 years of age. And the night of his funeral, her husband's funeral, she gathered them around her bed and she said, you know, God is going to take care of us. So this was a woman who had to find a job, and she did. And she sacrificed tremendously even to send her kids to the Catholic school, and that was important to her. And she also worked in a soup kitchen for many, many years, the latter part of her life. And one day she didn't get back home. And so 3 days later, they found her car pulled off to the side of the road, and her body was in the trunk, and she had been stabbed numerous times. And I was at that funeral, several years ago in Nashville, and I'll never forget, at the end of that massive Christian burial, Charlie, who was my friend and a priest in the Diocese of Nashville, got up and he said, Alice, Bob, Jerry, and I are deeply hurt, but we're not bitter and we're not revengeful. We seek no revenge because it would be against everything our mother has ever taught us. So despite what's happened, we would like to extend an olive branch of forgiveness to whoever murdered our mother. And I don't think there was a dry eye in that church, but it was a powerful, powerful witness to what forgiveness is like and how hard it is sometimes to forgive. You may have read about Gail Blount. She was a lady whose daughter was, I think her name was Catherine, and she was 18 years old. She was 18 years of age. She was a senior in high school, and one night she was a victim of a random murder. And Gail Blount just went into depression. For over 10 years, she was angry and bitter and revengeful. And then one day, something happened, and she was moved and inspired to write a letter to her daughter's murderer, and he was in San Quentin. And to her surprise, almost return mail, she got an answer back. And he asked for her forgiveness. She wrote him back. They started writing back and forth for a couple of years. And then one day, she was inspired. She said, I wonder if I could visit him. So she went through all the red tape that you have to do. So she ended up visiting the man who had murdered her daughter. And actually, he almost became her son. And then quarterly, she started visiting him. And then the other inmates started getting in on it too. So it became a ministry. In many ways, she became Christ to the person who had taken her daughter. So the power of forgiveness, how we need to be generous as God has been generous with us in forgiving. And I think Pope Francis is onto something. I think he sees lots of unforgiveness, lots of competition, lots of hatred and revenge, all of that kind of thing in our world. And so imagine what could happen if I became an instrument of forgiveness, or if you became an instrument of forgiveness right where we are, in big ways and little ways. So, amen. Is there anybody, any observations or any questions?
Did you speak of feelings in regard to forgiveness? How do the feelings, are they normal, or are they not? Are you supposed to have the feelings, or?
Well, I think you are human beings, so certainly we're going to feel those things that when we're hurt, I think people have to work through all that and own them. You have to, name and claim, and then eventually let go. I remember talking to a lady years ago, and she was so upset about a wrong that had been done to her, and she got so passionate. And I said to her, when did this happen? Thinking it happened just a few weeks. She said 30 years ago. And you know what? I was like, wow. So, there comes a time when you have to let go. You have to process it. But, when somebody's holding on to something that long, it's not normal as far as what we're called to in living the Christian life. So, learning to name and claim, get the help we need. And she obviously needed some outside help to help her process all that and to let go and forgive, because she was going to die a pretty miserable lady, unfortunately. But, so, I mean, I think you have to deal with feelings. It's part of who we are. It's part of the incarnation.
I think there's so many wonderful stories like you told, and probably everybody in here can go back in your own life and see where that forgiveness took place, and what an inspiration it was to us individually.
Right. Yeah. And that's why we're also, just like I think Francis is a witness to a lot of people, we're called to be a witness too by our lifestyle, how we live, how we treat each other, all of that. Yes.
I know one time I was on this trip and, there was a man on the bus that someone really did insult him, and right away, just like that old man did like this, and he said, that really hurt my feelings, you're forgiven. And you could just, the bus, everybody on the bus was just like,
Well, sometimes it's good to get it out rather than holding it within. Sometimes I've learned that you can hurt people without realizing it. And so, I think we also have a responsibility to go to somebody if they've hurt us and to say that. Because if the person doesn't have a clue that, what you have said has hurt them. So, okay, anything else?
I was just thinking how proud your mom and dad would be today.
Well, yeah, I think they're probably here.
Father Jerry, you really do sweep well.
Thank you.